Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Hudson River Foundation. I know most of you, but I'm Dennis Akowski. I'm the Science Director here at the Foundation. We appreciate you coming to our seminars. We also have a number of people on the webinar today, and we thank you for participating. Just like to go over a couple of ground rules before we get to our presentation. Those of you that are on the webinar, you can see us and hopefully hear us, and you can ask questions by writing in. And Sarah, I think, is giving you some directions on how to do that. So we'd like to hold the questions till the end, and we'll have questions from here, the audience that's here with us today, and the audience that's on the webinar. Today, I'm thrilled to announce we've got Tom Lake. Tom is somebody that I've known, I can't count the years, well over 30 years that I first met Tom. And Tom has been a fixture in the Hudson Valley for quite some time. He's the consulting naturalist for DEC's Hudson River Estuary program. When he's not counting fish and teaching and doing all sorts of wonderful things, he's an editor of the Hudson River Almanac that I hope all of you sign up for and read. It's in its 26th year. It's amazing. They said it wouldn't last, but it has.
20,000 people, more than 20,000.
20,000 people, amazing. And Tom is a practicing archaeologist as well, which I'm sure you're going to work into his talk today. The title of Tom's talk is The Lives and Legends of Hudson River Fishes. I think we're all going to be very much entertained and learn something. Tom.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much. I always enjoy coming here. I've been coming here for more years than I can remember. There's no better place to appreciate the majesty of the Upper Bay of New York Harbor and just everything that goes along with it than here at Hudson River Foundation. As you notice by the name of The Lives and Legends of Hudson River Fishes, you may figure out from that this is not going to be a lecture on fish. This is going to be a story of the Hudson River, the watershed, the fish, and us, and how we all come together. So we're going to weave our way through other kinds of lines until we get all that together. I can start. Is this working?
You got the pointer, Tom. How about that?
Well, I'm trying to go to the next slide.
Right.
Anyway, can everybody hear me? And can everybody see the screen? Yeah, what we're going to do is, if you have questions that are up, you've got to ask them right this second. That's good. But otherwise, as Dennis said, let's try to hold them at the end, and then we can go into as much answers as I can provide. Okay, this is Hudson River Almanac. Just briefly, I'll mention this. I have a sign-up sheet up here. Hudson River Almanac is its 26th year. And if you'd like to get it, it comes out every Friday, and in there is our best attempt at capturing the moments in the Hudson River that define the seasons. Right now, it's all about fish for the most part. Eagles, baby eagles are all over the place. Marine mammals are in the river feeding on the fish. It's a lot of things. This is one of the busiest times of the year. So if you're interested in that, when you get a chance later, you go up and sign it. You give me your name and your email address, and we'll put you on our list. Okay. Why teach the lives of fishes? What I do in the Hudson River Estuary program for DEC is I do a lot of student work. We take a lot of students on the Hudson River, and in that way I'm able to introduce students to fish in the Hudson River, and fish seem to be a wonderful conduit to be able to make that happen. And really what we're looking to do is engage the next generation. Probably it's never been more obvious than it is right now that we really do need the next generation to be environmentally smart and be able to use critical thinking. Critical thinking is the big thing, which I always worry at some point we're going to stop doing it anymore. We really cannot do that. Develop a constituency will advocate for clean air, clean water, and healthy land. Those three things right now are kind of they're not really being focused on now by people who should be focusing on it. And to my idea, fish connect students to the Hudson River. There's nothing like getting students on a beach, giving them a net, easiest way to catch fish. and take them out and catch some fish. When I stand on the beach with students, and I look out at the river, and I tell them that from this point to this point, there's 1 million fish out there. They have to take my word for it. Until I put a net in the water, and then I begin to catch them. Unlike when it takes students birding, you can see the birds. The eagles, we can see the eagles. We look for trees and mushrooms, all kinds of wildlife. But the one thing that river does not allow you to see through it unless you put a device out there to catch some of the fish. Young students especially are fascinated by fish. And what really makes me feel best is when I have young students who are not afraid to pick up a fish. You tell them it's not going to hurt you, and they pick it up. Because there are too many students, particularly in inner city areas, that have no experience with wildlife, and you put a fish in their hand, and they're about to melt right in front of you. So it's good to be able to talk about these things. And why do we study fish? Besides just the education, for knowledge, to inspire, and for the magic of discovery. Again, that river out there has a lot of fish in it. You don't know what's there until you put something out there, like a net, to try to catch the fish. And every time we put the net in the water, I've got 50 students behind me on the beach. We haul that net in. It's like a birthday party, and we're going to open a present. We pick that net up, we open it up. We never know what's going to be in it. We have a pretty good idea, but we're never sure what's in there. Every fish has a story to tell. I think this is the key to education when it comes to the Hudson River and fish in particular. Every fish has a story to tell. Pick any one of the fish which is on our checklist, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and there's a story behind them, why they're here, what their life history is all about, how they interact with other fish, how they interact with us. This happens to be a rainbow smelt. Rainbow smelt, and I'll get to that a little later too. Rainbow smelt are a somewhat subtle reminder that climate change is occurring. Rainbow smelt is really what we call an Arctic fish. It's a fish which would much rather be up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence or up along the coast somewhere. It's here in the Hudson River. It used to be in larger numbers here. It used to be quite common in the Hudson River, especially in the springtime when they're spawning. But things have happened with climate change. The temperature of the Hudson River has gone up almost imperceptibly to us. To this fish, they understand it, and it's giving them a message that this river is not going to be good for them. So they're moving out. Fish are a good measure of how we treat our world. I really have a whole bevy, a whole list of types of wild. We can talk about black bears, we can talk about maple trees, we can talk about birds and eagles. But I select fish because fish are a good measure of how well we treat our world. The water and the river and the fish will tell us what's going on. Fish are like the canary in the coal mine. They've always been that sort of a bio-indicator. When fish in the river are having trouble, even with the smelt not showing up anymore, it's an indicator that something is going on in the environment that makes the Hudson River a place that smelt don't want to be. And the other important thing about the Hudson River, and the fact that it's an estuary, while people like big fish, it's a small fish that teach us the most. The Hudson River has a good reputation for sport fishing. In the springtime, a lot of people, they're here now, come to catch striped bass, trophy-sized striped bass, 60, 70-pound striped bass. I remember taking a couple of sport anglers out on the river about 20 years ago, and we fished and fished and fished, and they were looking for trophy fish. And all they were catching were these little foot-long striped bass. And they were just depressed over that. They said, this is horrible. Where are all the big fish? And it gave me an opportunity to remind them, and everyone else that says that sort of thing to me, is that without the next generation, if all we have are big fish, then the species is in peril. And in the Hudson River, the fact that we've got 7, 8, 9 different year classes of striped bass, all the way from last year to young of the year through ones that may be 20 years old, ensures us that they're doing well in the Hudson River, and they're going to be doing well in the Hudson River. In large part, the presence of young of the year fish in the river is a good indicator that that particular species is doing well. So that's what we look for. Big fish are nice, but it's the little fish that tell us the most. And searching for a fish requires perseverance. This is my grandson who helps me go out and catch fish for students. And he's been here today, but he's in school. And the time before fish, those of us who love fish, we have to recognize that there actually was a time when we didn't have any fish here. And that was 21,000 years ago, during the last ice age. Most of New York State was frozen over. It's really nobody was home. By nobody, I mean Maybe some Arctic birds were breeding on the ice, but that's just about it. Tremendous glaciers went through here, and the Laurentide ice sheet covered it all. Glacial meltwater then, because the glacier ended, or the ice age ended maybe 18,000 years or so ago. And all the water that was in New York State melted. It couldn't make its way back out to the sea yet because there were a lot of dams. Right here at the Verrazano Narrows, that was the Harbor Hill moraine, and the inshore waters could not get back to the ocean. So we had these big glacial Lake Albany, glacial Lake Hudson. And it's in those water bodies, beginning about 15,000 years ago. That little mark before 15 is called a tilde, and it means about or approximate. Because a lot of these dates, we just are guessing, giving our best guess as to when they happened. But the Hudson River watershed was ice-free about 15,000 years ago, and the watershed was born. The watershed, as we know it today, was born. This is the Hudson River watershed. When we talk about fishes of the watershed, which is what we're talking about today, in that shaded area, theoretically and in practice, a drop of water that lands in the shaded area will end up in the ocean. If something is over here, it'll go into Delaware. Over a little further, it'll go into Susquehanna. And over here, maybe the Housatonic drainage as well. But that's our watershed. That's where we're. And the birth of an estuary, about 12,500 years ago, is when we think this Harbor Hill moraine and other dams along the Hudson finally broke through. And the Hudson River, the proto-Hudson River, was open to the ocean. At that point, though, we had had the ice age. And with the ice age, the ocean out there was perhaps a couple hundred feet lower than it is today. So even though it was open, it was a one-way trip. Water was coming out of the Hudson, but we probably didn't have tides in the Hudson River until maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe 9,000 years ago. Now, fish could probably once the water was here, fish could probably make it up. But we didn't have a true estuary at that time. So here's our Hudson River fish fauna we're going to talk about today. We have 228 species. 175 of them are native, which is about 77%. In this presentation, I'm picturing about 35% of them. I learned to put that in there because you probably all have favorite fish. And I can see that at the end you'll say, where's my oyster toadfish? Why wasn't it in your presentation? You can't cover them all. So I just covered some that I think are highlights. If your oyster toadfish was a highlight, I would have put it in, but I don't have an oyster toadfish in this one. So now, what do we mean by native fish? This is a very good teaching moment with students when you talk about native. Native species, whether it's flora, fauna, is an important concept because today invasive species are a very big issue in the watershed. In all of North America, this is an issue. And what we ask ourselves, whether it's a tree or a flower or a butterfly, a bird or a fish, was it here in September 1609 when the Dutch sailed up the Hudson River? If it was here, then it was native. If it wasn't here, then it was introduced at some point after that. So as I go through these, you'll see a little eye next to a fish. That means it's an introduced species. And fish, in this case, can be introduced in many ways. They could be stockfish. There's other ways to get. It could be intentionally, unintentionally put in the river. But these are fish that are not native. And with some of them, there's issues because they don't always play well with others. We've had fish come in the Hudson River who are not native, and they are having issues with fish that are native, even displacing them in some cases. Hudson River watershed fishes are really a big umbrella, and under that umbrella are different categories of fish. These are not hard and fast, by the way. Freshwater, brackish water, marine. Brackish meaning it's mixed with marine waters and freshwater. The thing to remember about most of them is that many of these fish can be anywhere they want. We're talking here before with this gentleman about different species in the river. The Atlantic menhaden, for example, was born just outside the Verrazano Narrows in the nearshore shallows. So it's actually a marine fish. But as young as a year, the size of your little finger, we have found them 80, 90 miles up the Hudson River in May and June. We don't know why they're there, but they're able to make that transition from saltwater to freshwater. It's a physiological change they go through. When they're out there, freshwater is very scarce and saltwater is common. As they move up the river, salt becomes rarer and freshwater becomes more common. So they have to go to a physiological change that saves salt and excretes freshwater as they get up into freshwater. So when fish move the river, and right now we've got probably millions of river herring in the river and shad, And they just don't go a beeline up the Hudson River. They kind of do a zigzag as they're going up the river, acclimating themselves to different salinities as they go up the river. They may go up the river 2 miles today and a mile back the next day to allow for that transition from salt water to fresh water. By the time they reach Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, Albany, they're fully conditioned for fresh water. Now, after they spawn and they head back to the sea, they'll that transition all over again. They've got to come down the river, a relatively slow pace to allow themselves to acclimate to more salt and less fresh water. Who are they and how did they get here? If you're an English major here, you're probably shuddering right now that I said who. I should be saying, that implies that they're something more than fish, but to me they really are. This is a spot-fin butterfly fish. Now, when the last ice age ended, and those glacial lakes were here, the first fish that showed up, we designate those as periglacial species. These are some of the first species that came here that were able to adapt to very cold water, not a whole lot of food, and they were the ones that colonized the watershed first. Northern pike is one of those. The brook trout is our New York State fish, another lover of cold water, and the lake trout, native fish that were here, among the very first fishes that were here in the Hudson. Getting into freshwater fish, these are some interesting ones. This one happens to be called the spot-tailed shiner. And I love this fish. In many ways, this is the Hudson River fish. Some of you may think about sturgeon and striped bass and these glamorous species. But from a taxonomic standpoint, this is really the Hudson River fish. This particular fish was described by Dewitt Clinton. Dewitt Clinton was the governor of New York State. He had 2 terms. And in the interim between those 2 terms, they weren't consecutive. Between those 2, he had a Thomas Jefferson bent to him. He liked science. He was inquisitive. He liked to do these kinds of things. So he caught one of these and sat down with it, as you will do with a new species, and he describes it. He describes all the attributes that this fish had. And then he handed it into the International Committee on Zoological Nomenclature. They're sort of the ones who say yay or nay to whether you got a new species or not. They got really busy when we started getting the canopies of the rainforest in Amazon. And they looked at this and they said, sure, yeah, this is a new species. And even though this fish is found throughout the Great Lakes, in addition to this area here, Dewitt Clinton named it after the Hudson River because that's the type site. That's where it was first found. So he calls it Atropus hudsonius, or essentially minnow from the Hudson River. So it's kind of nice, sort of the Hudson River fish named after the Hudson River. Other native species that we see a lot of, the red-breast sunfish, and these are species that you don't have to have fish in hand to be able to identify them. You can walk along streams, the banks of ponds and lakes, and look in the water. And if you have if you develop a good sight image, you can look in the water there and say, ooh, that's a red-breast sunfish, just by looking at different diagnostic field marks in this particular one. Another good one is the pumpkin seed sunfish. It's hard to see, but if we were standing along the river right now, so it has a little red flap here on its opercle. So that would be a red-breast sunfish. This used to be, and maybe to a certain extent still is, an activity you can take students on. There's a book, Dr. Stephen Smith put out a book back in 1994 called Fish Watching. It's this idea that you can go fish watching. You don't need a net. You don't need a rod and reel. All you need is maybe a pair of binoculars and a good idea of what you're looking at. You can do that. I've done this with students. The fish don't always cooperate, though. They just don't. In springtime, it's fairly easy because, for example, next week I'll be taking students out in some of the tributaries, and there'll be white suckers, which are pretty easy to find. The male's got this big red stripe on them and all, and the herring will be flying up the stream. So in those cases, it's okay to do it. Later on, it gets a little more difficult. Here's some more freshwater fishes. The yellow perch. Yellow perch were here when Henry Hudson arrived. Yellow perch is interesting because yesterday I was visiting the bald eagle nest up in Dutchess County, and in comes either mom or dad, I don't know which. They have 2 nestlings in the nest, and they brought in a gravid, which means full of eggs, yellow perch, and the nestlings were beside themselves. They had fish and eggs, and it was just terrific. And so far this spring, those nestlings have had channel catfish, goldfish, yellow perch, and a mallard duck, and maybe a squirrel too, I think. So the parents vary the diet, so they have whatever's available pretty much. Now the bottom one is a bluegill sunfish, related to the pumpkin seed, related to the redbreast, but it's not native here. It's native to the Great Lakes. It was introduced here. 100 years ago, people wanted these in their farm ponds so they could go out and catch them at a rod and reel. Very easy to do. So bluegills are here. They've never been an issue. They play well with others. They're not disruptive of other fish. The white sucker I mentioned just a moment ago, these are native species. These have been here. There used to be a cottage industry in the Hudson Valley up until about the mid-20th century, where people would go out in the springtime to capture white suckers and pickle them. And it was something you could do. You want pickled, if you want pickled sucker, you knew somebody in the neighborhood who was pickling them. You could take them. You don't do too much of that anymore. A couple other fish that look very similar, but one's native and one's not. The golden shiner is a native fish, and the bottom one is a rudd. Looks very similar, but it's imported. It was introduced from Europe. Goldfish and carp, both introduced. The common carp is found in every one of the contiguous states. And it started its journey in North America in the Hudson River at Newburgh in the 1830s, I believe it was. Somebody brought them over. We had a lot of this. Europeans coming from Europe to here, a lot of them lamented the fact that some of their favorite trees and fishes and birds, they didn't have them here in North America, and they felt lost. So there is this history of people in Europe bringing things to North America to make them feel comfortable. And carp was one of those. They were. No one ever looked out and said, "Gee, what are these fish going to do to the ecosystem?" They're notorious for disrupting the nursery beds of various kinds of sunfish, and they eat the eggs. So we didn't know that at the time, but they're here now, and they're like a naturalized citizen. The goldfish, we have a lot of goldfish in the river. Goldfish this spring are very popular with eagles. Could be because they're very obvious to see in the water, but there's been 9 or 10 times when we have seen a bald eagle flying over with this big orange goldfish. I don't know if it tastes good or not, but the eagles apparently they do. Most of those goldfish in the river were intentionally released from aquaria. They weren't brought here for anything else. It's the story. I know when I was young, I had a fish tank, and I didn't do a very good job of taking care of it. So my mom and dad said, tonight when you come home, clean the fish tank. If tomorrow morning it's not clean, the fish are going in the river, and that's what happens. Parents get, the students are not taking care of the fish, and down to the river they go. We've had several species of fish end up in the Hudson River and wonder, how did they ever get here? And a lot of them, like the goldfish, that's how they got here. Aquaria release, and they do reproduce in the water. Here's a great blue heron trying to swallow a goldfish. But this spring, it's mostly been eagles that are they're just loving the goldfish in the river. Some of the other fish we have in the river that we catch a lot when we're out with students are the killifish, banded killifish, and mummy chuck. What I remind students of with this fish, the killifish, is that a large part of their diet is mosquito larvae. And you can't quantify it, but I often say to them, if you just snap your fingers and all of our killifish disappeared, I wonder what kind of a mosquito problem we would have. These are used as a biological control. They have been used in New York City in standing water areas, ponds and lakes. Killifish have been used as a biological control to control mosquitoes. That wasn't their first option. Whoever made the decision for New York City first figured they would spray. And I remember 10, 15 years ago or so, there'd be a notice that would go out. Tuesday, we're spraying Queens. Stay in your house, close your windows, close your doors, put your air conditioner on, don't go outside. And they'd spray standing water in Queens, and maybe the Bronx the next day. Pretty quickly, somebody figured out that's not really the way to do this. So they stopped, and we're using things like killifish as a biological control. And since they're native species, it's not like you're putting something in that shouldn't be there. Blue-banded mud, that's another name for a friend of ours who's on with us, Everett Knack. He used to, he had a way with names of fishes. He didn't like the killifish, so he called them blue-banded mud. This is a male during breeding season. Gorgeous lavender bars on the side, just absolutely beautiful fish. Now, brackish marine. Now remember, these fish, I give them a label brackish marine. Some of these fish can live in freshwater all year if they wanted to. Some of them can live in the ocean all year if they wanted to. So there's a lot of flux going on. The striped killifish, we sometimes see them in the Hudson River. They're a little more loving of salt water, though, than the other killifish. So if you go to Jamaica Bay, if you go to Sandy Hook, places like that, you'll find thousands of these striped killifish. The hot choker is a ubiquitous fish in the Hudson River. It's one of the favorite ones to catch and talk to students about. It's a flatfish, like a flounder. And its name is hot choker. And so the story you tell students about the hot choker is how it got its name. If I hold that in the palm of my hand and I stroke it with my finger from head to tail, it's nice and smooth. If you go tail to head, it's like running your fingers over the edge of a steak knife, something like that. Very, very difficult. You can't move your hand. So the idea is that if you have livestock, particularly pigs, and these were a favorite of those who had livestock. They'd go to the river, it wouldn't cost anything, put a net in the water, catch 1,000 of these guys, take them in, but you have to be sure when your pigs ate them, they ate them head first. Because if they ate them tail first, they would choke them. It's a great story. How much of this is true, I don't know, but it's a great, great story. So I'm here to share it with you. Landed menhaden. We were talking before about this one here. This is a member of the herring family of fishes, most of which are fishes that live in the ocean, they come in the river to spawn, and then they go back again. So they're kind of like that transition. This one's a little different. It's a herring, but it's born in the ocean, and then it spends much of its first summer into autumn in the estuary, as far upriver, maybe as far as Albany. What motivates them to do that, we don't know. It's hard to believe that it's anything other than serendipity. I don't know why they do it. There's no lack of food anywhere else they live in. And it's not necessarily to escape predation because they're better protected in the lower estuary to the turbidity of the water than they are up there. But they do it anyway. So these fish spawn, they're spawning now. And in the next month and a half, 2 months, I'll begin to see them little small, an inch long, 2 inches long, 3 inches long. And they'll be in the river by tremendous numbers, millions of them. Here's some young of the year come fall time. This is the size when they begin to look like Snickers bars for the bigger fish. They all want these. And here's the adult. This was taken in the Hudson River, perhaps at the River Project. I'm not sure. We have some folks at the River Project. This one may have been taken from the River Project. These are Atlantic menhaden, and they fill up the water, and it's just amazing the tremendous schools that they have. And then back in 2016, right, Paul? 2016, we don't normally get whales in the Hudson. Right? There's enough food out there. The river is shallow in here, not their favorite place to be. But 2016 in the fall, there were so many of these 10, 12-inch long menhaden that this one humpback whale just couldn't resist. And he came under the Verzon there, came up here, went up as far as the George Washington Bridge, went up the East River, just Manhattan Bridge anyhow, I think it was. And it spent, about 2 weeks or so, or 10 days, 2 weeks. And it just had a great time. Different people were seeing it all along in the harbor. And it was feeding on these menhaden. This is one of the great pictures. This is the humpback whale. It goes down, it goes underneath the school of fish, and it comes up. It's called lunge feeding. And those are all menhaden being dispersed all over the place. And it might grab 150, 200 fish at a time. But it was just too much for that whale to resist. Our worry at the time was when whales or dolphins come into the Hudson River, it often means they're disoriented, they're sick, they're not doing well. And we often see the problem with that. It may be a one-way trip. Dolphins, ordinarily, they come in the river, and within a month or so, we find them washed up on a beach someplace. They're sick for one reason or another. And whales, too, but not this whale. This whale, when it was done, we didn't actually see it, although Paul said they recognized it out beyond the Verzon Narrows after it had been here in the Hudson Harbor. So that whale left, and we were happy about that. Drums along the Hudson. These are fish of the drum family. We have 7 of them. Another nice story to tell. This one here happens to be a spot. It's also called the Lafayette. When I first began in the 1970s with fish on the river, there were still a lot of people around who remembered earlier times when this fish was known as the Lafayette. I don't know too many people now. You don't see it in books, but they used to be known as the Lafayette. And the story on that is that in 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette, who was so instrumental in helping us win the American Revolution, he came back to New York City for a ticker tape parade. And when he was here, now this fish is one of those that they may be all over the place this year, and you can't find them next year. They have drastic levels of abundance and scarcity. Natural changes, natural levels of abundance and scarcity. Nothing that we're causing in any way at all. But in that year, they came and they were active. And so people said, let's call this fish the Lafayette, in the honor of Marquis de Lafayette. But it's just a name we don't hear anymore. We know it as a spot. Other drum. This was an interesting situation here. The big drum on the left side is an adult drum. Now, back 5 or 6 years ago, the black drum was not on our species list. We figured it had to be here. There were some old pictures from 75 years ago of somebody catching one in Perth Amboy. The newspaper account shows a photo and all that. But there was nothing that really said it was caught here in the harbor. It could have been caught in the Jersey Gulf or somewhere. And then we found this one washed up on the beach at Piermont, 25 miles north of here. We said, well, that's interesting, but we have to make it happen again. We can't take that one dead fish because people, over these years, we've had tricksters in the Hudson Valley who will go out in the ocean and catch a fish, like a blue shark, and they'll truck it up to Albany and throw it on the beach. And we'll all wonder how it ever got there. We have ways of detecting things like that now, so we're not taking. But there was a time when we wondered how these odd fish got different places in the Hudson Valley. Most of the time, a lot of times, if some angler goes out, catches it, brings it home, scares the neighborhood children with it, and then takes it down the river and throws it on the beach. So we have to be wary of what fish go on our list. And about 5 years ago, the Lamont Doherty people who were fishing in the river with nets, they caught the little yearling black drum on the top. And since then, we have found out the second one on the bottom here as well. So now we know that if they're not spawning there, they're probably not. They're probably spawning Sandy Hook Bay or Jamaica Bay, somewhere on the other side of the narrows. But they're coming into Hudson River in the summertime. So they are here. That was good enough for us to put it on our fish list. Seahorses. This has a great story too. You know, some of these ones, you can capture the imagination of students in an instant with something like a seahorse. This is a male seahorse. It's got a brood pouch. Seahorses and pipefish have a very unique, they're unique among fishes in what they do. The female has eggs that are been impregnated, and then once she has those eggs, she then goes over to the male and says, open up, and he opens up his brood pouch. Think of a kangaroo, right? His pouch. He opens his brood pouch, and she dumps the eggs into his brood pouch, and then she's done. The male goes through labor. Think how nice that is if you're a woman. There's a male species out there somewhere. They go through labor. I've never seen the male seahorses in the throes of agony, but I will tell you I snorkel a lot. I was snorkeling at Croton Point 4 or 5 years ago, and there were northern pipefish right here. You can see the eggs in his brood pouch right there. This was a northern pipefish, and he's swimming in the water, and with this grimace on his face, right? It's hard for a seahorse to have a grimace, but I swear it was a grimace. And all of a sudden he stops, and his pouch opens, and out of his brood pouch comes maybe 50 or 60 tiny, fully formed pipefish, the size of the head of a pencil, and they're all going off like that, right? And then the other goes, but it's kind of neat. There's a species, a family of fishes, where it's decided that's an adaptation to survival. Somewhere back in time, I try to look at things as adaptations. Somewhere back in time, there was an advantage for pipefishes and seahorses to have the males carry the eggs and actually give birth. Don't know what that adaptation, why they did it. Usually it's something in the environment that they react to. But that happened way before we were even around, so we can't take credit for anything like that. Landing needlefish. These are fish that you probably would never know they're in the river unless you put a net and catch one. If you walk along the river in the summertime, it'll look like there's sticks out in the water. They float up on top of the water, and they just kind of sit there. They feed by sight, and if a little herring or another fish comes along, they'll dart out and they'll grab it. Their jaw is very toothy, but you'll never know that they're there. And the thing that makes it interesting about these fish is its lateral line. It has what we call a ventrally adjusted lateral line. Way down here is its lateral line. Now the lateral line on any fish that has, most of them do, it's that air-water interface. It tells them water, air, they're in the water, they're in the air. A needlefish, because it's got this ventrally adjusted lateral line, it can sit right up on top of the water and still maintain a connection with its lateral line. It tells us there's predators in the area. It tells them that there are fish and food around. So that's an adaptation to being able to float on top of the water and still hunt. And hunt. So they're really a fascinating fish. They're actually tropical kind of fish. But when I first began studying fish in the Hudson River, these were not common. They were seen as almost a tropical species that had been moving up, and we see them in the summertime. Now, in the last 10, 15 years or so, we're finding larval needlefish above Kingston. And the only way to interpret that is that these fish have adapted to the Hudson River, and now they're even spawning here. It's the only way that larval fish could get up there. The literature says they need salt water, at least some salt water, but apparently they've been able to adapt. That's kind of a theme that goes along with the Hudson River. Almost every fish we have out there is very resilient, or they wouldn't be in this river. This river is very dynamic between water temperature, tides, currents, all of that. If you don't have a sense of resiliency about you, you're not going to make it in the Hudson River. Flatfish, we have flounder, winter flounder, and summer flounder, and the way we tell them apart is by what side of the head their eyes are on. This is summer flounder. The eyes are on the left side of its head, and the winter flounder on the right side of their head. These fish, when they're born, they look like a normal fish. They're oriented straight up. They got one eye on each side, and they look like a normal fish. Soon after they're born, they begin to, it's like a computer program is going on inside them. They begin to lie on their side. If they're a left-eyed flounder, they'll lie on their left side, the right side. If they're right-eyed flounder, they'll lie on their left side. And the head kind of turns, and the eyes migrate over the top until they're on the bottom with two eyes on top. And that would make sense to have one on the bottom if you're looking down at the sand. But it's one of these adaptations, perhaps to survival. It's better to be on the bottom, inconspicuous, a flatfish, perfectly camouflaged, and having that sort of way of adapting by changing your morphology works well for that. Now this is summer flounder, which doesn't often make it up far up the Hudson River. They really do like salt water, and yet not too many years ago, my wife and I caught this summer flounder up by Cold Spring, and we caught it. What is this fish doing here? We do a lot of that throughout the year. We'll catch a fish that, by all regards, it shouldn't be here, and we say, "What is this fish doing here?" There is literature which goes with all these fish, and it's fun to be able to find a fish out of place and then look and see where the literature probably should be updated on these species. That's what an estuary will do. Sharks. This is one of the favorites with the students. Eventually, they always get around to sharks. And even upriver, we have stories of sharks. This is a dusky shark from 1894. Now, we don't have photos. We don't have bodies. Most of this particular fish as well, comes from newspaper accounts, very detailed newspaper accounts. This one here in 1894, very detailed. It described the fish, the fin placement, its teeth. This was a croton point. And from that, we were able to discern that A, it was caught in the Hudson River, and that it is a dusky shark in its case. So on the basis of that evidence, we put it on our list. And it's not the only dusky shark that we've had stories of, mostly through newspaper accounts. Then there's this one here, which was added not too long ago. This one was also captured by a commercial fisherman at Croton Point in 1881. And for several days, the local newspaper had stories about this fish. It started off very generic, big fish. Then we think it's a shark. And finally, by the third day, they were talking about the head, the odd head, and all the other attributes that made it a hammerhead shark. But then we had to figure out what species of hammerhead shark it could have been. And when we looked at the species of hammerhead shark, there aren't too many that can live at this latitude in the western North Atlantic. And it came down to this one right here, the smooth hammerhead. And the description in the literature and the description in the newspaper matched perfectly. So we added that one in as well. And in 1880, there's this famous lithograph about it. In the 1880, there was a shark attack here in the upper bay of New York Harbor. And there's all kinds of drawings and the history of this. We don't even know what kind of sharks they were. But there were people in boats were being attacked, and it was quite a thing. Went up into the East River. And from that, we know that there were sharks around. The two sharks that we encounter most commonly are the dogfish sharks. When I tell students that, they get very disappointed because they want something that can tear their leg off. They want to know when they walk in the water, something very bad might happen to their friends. Now the smooth dogfish on top has very flat teeth. It mostly feeds on shellfish. The one on the bottom is a piscivore, a spiny dogfish. It has tusks on its teeth and it feeds on other fish. It likes squid where they're found. But these are dogfish. These are not ones that are going to take your leg off. They're in the river. We don't see them terribly frequently, but they're really, really, really interesting animals. This happens to be Staten Island, where there are lots of them at certain times of the year. Now, here's one that I caught in a commercial net back in the 1990s, I guess it was, and I caught this. You know, as a teacher, whenever I would catch something like this, immediately I say to myself, the fish was dead when we got it. It drowned in the net. And I think to myself, what a great teaching school this is. I'm going to take this, I'm going to freeze it, or whatever I have to do, and stretch it out and teach as many students as I can the anatomy of a shark. Everything about them. They have bells and whistles that many other fish just don't even have. So I brought this one home, and the next day I went down to a park where I had some fourth graders, I think it was, and we looked at this fish, and I said, look at this fish here. It's just, now it was a female. Should have been a tip-off for me, but it wasn't. I said, let's open her up and see what she's been eating. I thought that stomach was filled with all kinds of stuff. I was hoping it wasn't somebody's leg. But yeah, this is dogfish. That's not going to happen. So we did a necropsy on this female smooth dogfish. And what I thought would have been an interesting teaching moment, just telling about the shark and what they feed on, look at their teeth and all that. Inside were 10 pups. 10 pups. 5 males and 5 females. It was one of the nicest programs I was able to do with these fourth graders, because I went in and I took them out one at a time. And I'd pull out a boy, and everybody, the boys would cheer. I'd pull out a girl, female, and the girls would cheer. And luckily, it was 5 of each. So at the end, they were content with knowing there was both sexes were present. But it was really quite the experience, and they loved it. I'm sure those fourth graders remember it today. Bluefish, another fish that is born out in the ocean. Like the mentate, and they'll be in the Hudson River next month. Very small little bluefish. By the time they leave here in the fall time, grown up, fully ready to take on the rigors of the open ocean, they'll be as big as the one that's Peter Park's bluefish on the top. These are young in the year bluefish on the bottom. But these are eating machines. They consume a lot of baby fish in the river each year. They're a good example of why fish don't just have 2 offspring. They lay 500 eggs. Hopefully one of them survives, because the other 499 are being eaten by fish like this here. That's an adaptation fish have. Lots and lots of eggs. Hopefully a lot of them will hatch, and some of them will end up surviving. Temperate tropical strays. The Gulf Stream has a big effect. The Gulf Stream has a large effect on the Hudson River watershed. We get fish that show up here that this is not their home base. They're coming from other places. Sometimes as larval fish. There's Winslow Homer, some sharks there. Spanish mackerel, one of them. They're not common here. They're more of a southern fish, but they show up in the river. These we got in a shad net one spring. Beautiful, beautiful big Spanish mackerel. Ladyfish, which is a relative of the tarpon, which is one of the premier game fish in the world. Ladyfish, we've had a couple of instances of these in the river. Back in 1984, I got into a school of these 70 miles up the Hudson River. I hooked and landed one because they're impossible to keep hooked. And it's in the Museum of Natural History right now. The school left. I never saw one again. Never saw one again. It's just one of these moments that occurs. If you're not there to see it, it never happens. So that was kind of nice. We have some real tropical-looking fish in the river. The 4-eye butterfly fish and spot-fin butterfly fish. Not a lot of them, and you'd have to go into the marshy areas of the lower harbor, even the upper bay perhaps, more out towards the East River, and you'd find these. Then one of my favorite family of fishes, the jacks. These are fish that can live in saltwater or freshwater as long as they make that transition. That's a crevalle jack. Most of these show up when we do summer programs on the Hudson. We'll be pulling in that, and I will pop one of these, and they have a great story to tell. The one on the right is a permit, a baby permit. If you go to the Caribbean and go sport fishing in the Caribbean, permit, big permit, are one of the top line fish to go catch. There's the Cabell Jackie on the left. The look down, the moonfish, these are beautiful fish that have a real tropical look to them. Because if you wanted to go to the center of abundance for these species, you'd be in Biscayne Bay probably, Miami. They're just not here. The Gulf Stream brings them up here as larval fish, and we end up with them. Here's a good example of how fish make it onto our list. This was a type of jack that was not on our list. In fact, the literature says they don't even occur inshore. But Chris Anderson at the River Project back in 2014 took several pictures. And I looked at these, and they're, even though they're not the greatest photos in the world, they're very distinctive. There's some marks, field marks on there that immediately tell you what it is. And that was helpful. It was a banded rudder. This is a Peter Park one you caught on a rod and reel. But they're a beautiful type of jack. But before 2014, we didn't know they were here. And again, they could be, with a lot of these fish, like those lofty heads, we may have a lot of banded rudderfish here this year, and then not see them for 10 years. There's a lot of dynamics going on offshore that affect what we see in the Hudson River. And people are always too quick to assume that every little change that happens in the Hudson River is somehow connected to things we're doing. There are natural cycles going on out there and in the river. And we have to be able to figure out what one says. We're not to blame or should get credit for everything. Bonefish, another tropical fish. When I tell anglers, we've caught bonefish in the river, their ears perk up. This is another one of the most sought after game fish. We've caught baby bonefish the size of my little finger at Osnick several times. Again, these fish were from Florida, the Carolinas. The larvae drifted up here in the Gulf Stream. They got to a point where they were able to move around on their own. They come into the estuary looking for a safe place to be. The estuary, by the way, is always a safe place for fish. Because of the turbidity that goes with the river, predators have a more difficult time finding prey. A baby bonefish off Sandy Hook or off Coney Island has a life expectancy of about 10 seconds because the clear water, something's going to eat them. And so there is this tendency, it's adaptation to survival. If you're a small fish, especially one who is used to swimming and get away from predators, they'll come into the river because they find a place where they can kind of hide out. Barracuda, we have barracuda in the Hudson River. Not giant barracuda, but we have species of barracuda we catch from time to time in the river. It's great when we catch these with students because we tell them they're barracuda. Next thing you know, nobody wants to go in the water. These are babies. Plainhead filefish, orange filefish, these are real tropical looking species. And we do catch them from time to time. Spotted hake, these are the cod. We have 8 species of cod in the Hudson River. This is one of them. This is spotted hake, which the River Project gets from time to time, and we do get them. They're here in the winter, so they are around. I throw this in here because it's such a nice, interesting fish. This is the lumpfish, Cyclopterus lumpus. Why is it on here? No reason. I just like the name. According to Jatnet at Fort Lee, 30 years ago, 25 years or so ago, it's the only one we've ever seen in the Hudson River. It's on the list, but nobody else has ever seen one. It's a northern fish which has made its way down there. The wrasses, the tautog, one of the best eating fish in the Hudson River. And its relative is the cunner, also called the burgal. In New England, when you say cunner or burgal, people scratch their head. What are you talking about? They're called chockies. The names that people give fish, common names in various areas are very interesting. This is one of the records. A naturalist, these are fish that live in the ocean, and they come back to their native river, in this case the Hudson, or eventually some go up to the Mohawk, to spawn, and then they go back. Fish have been doing this in the Hudson River for probably 10,000 years. And that's always nice. I always have to remind people of that everything, some people you get the feeling they think nothing happened in the Hudson River until they showed up. The people were here. The Atlantic salmon, one of the mysteries of the Hudson, which I get a question a lot of times with the adults, is about, they heard there were Atlantic salmon in the Hudson, they're not here anymore. What did we do? How did we get them out of here? A couple of things here. The whole story of the Atlantic salmon comes from Henry Hudson's ship log, that they saw great stores of salmon in the Hudson River in September If you know Atlantic salmon, you know they're a springtime spawner, and so they would not be in the river in September in great numbers. They just wouldn't be here. So right away you're thinking these are not Atlantic salmon, there's something else. The other thing to remember too, when the Dutch first arrived here, the English too, they saw fish in this river that they had never seen before, like striped bass, for example, and sea trout. It's quite likely what Hudson saw in the river was something else. It was not salmon. Having said all that, we do know that there probably were salmon, not many of them in the river, from time to time. DEC tried to stock them in the river, and they were here for a while, and then they just couldn't make it. The real reason was salmon, Atlantic salmon, are very particular about where they spawn. The bottom of the river, the substrate has to be just right for them. And they don't find a lot of that perfect substrate here. The rivers of New England, yes, higher gradient, cooler summertime temperatures, they do very, very well. Hudson River, no. So they were here at one time, they're just not here anymore, and they left because they didn't find the river hospitable. It was not a place where they could thrive. American shad, on the other hand, have thrived in the river for a long time. The thing about shad, shad's closed right now. About 10 years ago it was closed because they were being overfished. And the only way to ensure a future for American shad was to close the fishery and just not let anybody catch them anymore. It's kind of working. It hasn't been 100% successful, but it's kind of working. But American shad supported commercial fishing in the river for 4,000 years. The native people who lived here, they would catch American shad and they would take them inland to places where people were not fishing, and they'd swamp it for whatever kind of goods that they had. So it actually is bartering, but still commercial. The Hudson River. Here's young and ear fish in the river. Commercial fishing, the reason we ended up having to stop commercial fishing is because for most of the 20th century, American shad were seen as a bottomless well. You could go and take all the fish you want, and it didn't matter. Even when I was commercial fishing, other fellow anglers on commercial fishermen in the river had that feeling that they didn't care if they caught more fish than they could use, because the fish will always be there. That was the sentiment. But we know that's not the case. So today we don't commercial fish anymore. We sit around and do research on striped bass, or as John Milab is doing, is just lamenting the fact that right now he ought to be out on the river catching shad. But people, our species tends to not know when to say when. We just don't. We're learning that we have to, though. There's a couple of very nice books written about shad. I like this idea of reading a book, sort of historical fiction, about American shad and Hudson River. These are out of print, there's another one too. But used bookstores on the internet, you can probably find. This is a wonderful book. It takes place it actually starts during the American Revolution, when shad fishermen were out in the river, and they would post people at high places along the shore to look for British warships. So in those days, when you were a commercial fisherman, you also had to worry about getting blown out of the water. That's one of them. It's called Shad Run, and the other one's called Shad Hall. This one is really nice too. It takes place in Cold Spring, and folks, there's a high school there. It's Haldane High School, but they use a different name, high school. And it takes place in 1947. The gentleman in the stern there is a World War II veteran. He comes home and he takes these two young high school students under his wing, and he teaches them how to commercial fish. And more than that, he gave them, he instilled in them a love for the river and everything that was in the Hudson River. So that was the real story. They caught fish, they caught shad, but the real story there is this gentleman just sharing his love for the river with these two students. A really wonderful book. River herring, that's what's out here right now. As we sit here, I can say from that point to that point, there's a million herring out here, and I'd probably be very conservative in that. These are our two river herring, bluebacks and alewives. It's kind of hard to tell from the top fish and the bottom fish are blueback herring, and the one in the middle is an alewife. They look exactly alike. I can tell by the eye diameter. It's interesting the things we do in science to know if the diameter of this eye is greater than the length of its nose, it's an alewife. If the diameter of this eye is equal to or less than the diameter of the length of its nose, then it's a blueback herring. So frequently we're on the beach holding up herring with a little measuring eyes and noses, and people are going crazy. Yeah, if you don't want to hurt it, you don't want to kill the fish, you want to put it back. It's just a quick way to be able to tell. Now, if you have time and you want to find out, you open them up, and the top one is the alewife. Their stomach lining is pink. The blueback herring, their stomach lining is white. And this holds true in the summertime when you get the little baby ones. That's how you can tell them apart. There are two different species, closely related, but two different species. The alewives are in the river now, and they're going to go up and spawn and do what they do. And then a few weeks to a month later, the blueback herring will come in. And because nature staggers the arrivals of these fish in the river, they can have herring, bluebacks, and alewives at the same time. But it makes sense to spread them out so the resources of the river don't get overloaded by a glut of millions of fish. The blueback herring will come in the river, and what they've done in fairly recent times is they've learned to get through the lock, the federal lock at Troy. And they get above the lock at Troy. And why they started doing this, I have no idea. And then they go up to the Waterford Flight. If you go to the Waterford Flight, it's a series of locks that takes you over 100 feet high into the Mohawk River. And then the blueback herring swim out the Mohawk River out past Amsterdam, way out in the Mohawk River. That's where they spawn. You know, why they can't spawn here, we don't know. It's just one of these stories the fish does. And maybe it's to spread out these spawning areas so more survive. I'm not sure about that. But they migrate, right now they're migrating by the millions. Now something that's been happening again, since the fish were here, before we even showed up, but as long as we've been here, it's something we've taken a lot of notice of, that these fish are coming up the river by the millions and tens of millions, and there are the toll takers. The toll takers are out there right now. On top is a harp seal. The harp seal right now is upriver near the head of tide, and it's waiting for the herring to get there, in a shed. The bottom left is a harbor seal. There's at least two of them out there right now, and that's only because we've been able to see the two harbor seals. They're here for the same reason. And on the right are harbor porpoises. There's at least three of them out here right now, and they're here for the same reason. They're not a common marine mammal in the Hudson. They're here this year, which is kind of nice. But along the river in the last week, several groups of people have seen them from as far north as 96th Street down to 60th Street, maybe even further down towards Chelsea. So that's so they're in the river, and these are the they're here and they're here because they know some of these they haven't participated before. Somehow they find out, they get the word that they should be here in springtime to take advantage. That harp seal is a female, it's a year old. It probably wasn't in the river last year, but it knew enough to come here. Here's a herring in the river. This is up near Troy. These are herring in the river spawning. Striped bass. We can do a whole hour on striped bass. This is one of those fish that have been so instrumental in safeguarding many aspects of the Hudson River, from a pump storage facility at Storm King Mountain, the power plants on the river, and everything. This is a fish that is so popular as a sport fish that it commands respect because it means a lot of money. And when you begin to fight the battles, particularly the Hudson River, the battles, it comes down to what is something worth. Too many times we hear, is it worth worrying about? Is it worth saving? We're not doing that quite as much, but there was a time when it came down to the value of sport fishing versus more power. We shouldn't have to fight that fight, but you can imagine we have to. We have three fish in this family, the river basses. I have this here only because the striped bass is on top, white perch on the bottom. Those are both native fish. The fish in the middle is different. The fish in the middle is a white bass, native to the Great Lakes. Somehow it got here in the river. It's the only one in all my years I've ever found in the Hudson River. It's on our list, but it's the only one I've ever found. On this day, at the Dan Scamber Power Generating facility up in Orange County, within an hour I caught all three of these. And they were all there at that one day. That was that one special moment that if I had not been there, I would not have had a record of white bass in the Hudson River. But it was there and I got it. So I wonder how many other moments when I'm sleeping at night or when I'm doing something, and I miss moments. When I first started doing this job at DEC, I had that problem. I always felt I should be someplace. And if I am someplace, I should be someplace else. So I'm missing something. Luckily, with the Almanac, I've got a collection of wonderful people, observers, like the folks from the River Project, who send me detailed data, because there are places that I cannot get, and photographs. And it's because of the support system we have at the Almanac that makes it what it is. Sturgeon, endangered species. We actually found one in the Hudson River side scan sonar last year at Hyde Park. It was over 14 feet long. 14 feet long. There were rumors about these huge big sturgeon in the Hudson River for years. Of course, we never believed them. And here it was. It was a 14-foot sturgeon in Hudson River. And how old that fish was? Maybe 75, 80 years old, maybe even more. Very, very impressive fish. The problem with sturgeon, and we love sturgeon to death. The Bill Doble years, Dennis will remember that when the foundation had a gentleman named Bill Doble go out and do some research on it.
Isn't there a thing that they don't have as much babies?
Here it is. They spawn every 3 to 5 years. And unlike shad every year, striped bass, you think every year, herring every year. Sturgeon have been around for 250 million years. And they've got their ways of doing things. And they've yet to find the advantage of adapting to spawning every year. And it may have something to do with their physiology, I don't really know. But they don't spawn, they spawn like every 3 to 5 years. And what that means is when they're not spawning, they're out there in the river or out there in the ocean, and they're very vulnerable. And until they became an endangered species, there were spotter planes looking for them, there were commercial operations looking for them, siphoning adults before they were able to spawn. That has stopped now. That's an interesting part of the life history of Atlantic sturgeon, is they don't spawn every year. And it makes them vulnerable. Luckily, we have found a way to protect them. Here's the baby Atlantic sturgeon. Cute little guys. And there's a short-nosed sturgeon, another endangered species. The Atlantic is like the shad. They live in the ocean, they come in to spawn, and we think then they go back to the ocean, and in a certain period of time, the babies follow them back out. Short-nosed is a little different. Short-nosed has an adaptation to living in an estuary. They can live freshwater, saltwater, anything in between, and they tend to like to stay in the estuary. They have every capability of leaving and going out to the ocean. There's nothing that keeps them from doing that. But for some reason, most of our short-nosed sturgeons stay in the Hudson. We have a fairly robust population of short-nosed sturgeon in the river. They're endangered not because of their presence in this river, but because other rivers on the coast where there are short-nosed, they're really threatened. The numbers have been dropping. There aren't very many of them. So to protect the entire species, we closed the fishery. These have been closed for as long as I can remember, short-nosed. And the story of sturgeon is this 400-year legacy of just apathy, arrogance. These sturgeon right here were stripped of their roe, their caviar, and the fish themselves, most of the time, were just dumped back in the river again. Sometimes they were sold, but not all. A lot of times they simply catch the fish, rip out the roe, throw the fish. It's probably 40 or 50 or even 60 years old. It lived all those years to just simply give its eggs, and now it's gone. This was such an unwise way to treat a species of fish. And of course, indifference and apathy. Many people would argue that there's so many sturgeon out there that it doesn't matter. When I first started, there were those who thought the Atlantic sturgeon was plentiful enough that they could do things like this. They were still doing that back in the 70s. Caviar is the big thing. $100 an ounce in some places, sometimes more than that. We had a friend who used to fish for sturgeon in the river, and he told me if he caught 5 or 6 sturgeon a year, which is no problem for him, he could buy a new pickup truck. How's that? He could buy a new pickup truck. And so that is quite an enticement to go out and catch 5 or 6 fish. Of course, he wouldn't stop at 5 or 6, he'd want 2 pickup trucks. He'd keep on going. Catastrophe, the American eel. Another twist on the life history. Here's a fish that's born at sea, comes in and spends its entire life in fresh water, and then goes back to the sea to spawn. And there's many of, we think, in this story, because we think they go back to spawn. We think they're born out in the ocean. There's so many gaps in the life history of the eel that we are just surmising and assuming. We don't know exactly. If we had to go out in the ocean right now and point to a place where we know eels spawn, we'd have to do an approximation. When they go back out again, we'd have to have an approximation. We just don't know. What we do know is the eels, we think, and look how large that area is, the Sargasso Sea. We think that's where they are born. And I put the beginning or the end. That's where we think they begin life, and that's where the life ends for them. They're spawned, the baby eels come in the Hudson, they spend anywhere from 12 to 20 years, then they go back to that same place, and we think they die. The curious part of this story is that we've never found an American eel that spawned and lived. We've never found one that spawned and died. We have never found a newly spawned leptocephalus, which is a baby eel. We never found that either. And with the hundreds of millions of eels that go to that place, you would think if they're all spawning and dying, and you'd see them around on the bottom. No, it's like, I don't know where they go, but it's this mystery. And I always tell my students that someday one of you will have a PhD thesis and it'll discover the mystery of the American. But they start off in life as a leptocephalus somewhere near this Sargasso Sea. They come into the Hudson River. Now, when they're out in the ocean, they're transparent to translucent. Because if you're living in the ocean with a lot of hungry fish, to be invisible is the best way to survive, and that's what they do. They come in the river as we call glass eels. They are, in fact, translucent. They're in the river right now by the many, many thousands of them. And we're monitoring, we're catching them, counting them, and those kinds of stuff. Once they get in the Hudson River, they begin to grow pigment, because now they're in the river, and it's best, being transparent isn't all it's cracked up to be once you're in the river. They will grow the colors of the bottom of the river. So now they can move along the bottom of the river and be camouflaged. You can see they went from being translucent to being to look like the bottom of the river, and we catch them by the thousands. This particular day right here, we caught 6,004. It was interesting because the media came with their cameras and their notebooks and stuff, and we brought all these Americans. Now we have to count every one, and we even weigh them. And by an hour, the media left. They couldn't take us watching us meticulously count 6,004 baby eels. But so they wanted something big and exciting and flashing, and that just didn't do it for them. And we talked a little before about climate change. There are subtle indicators, and some people would say it's not so subtle, but we have a couple species of fish in the river that in maybe not my lifetime, but certainly back in the middle of the 20th century, were very abundant. Atlantic tomcod is one of them. One of my very earliest remembrances is going to Verplank on the Hudson River and going to a tavern there with some friends. And there were so many of these Atlantic tomcod in the river that they were French frying them. And when you bought your beer, there were no peanuts and pretzels. There were Atlantic tomcod kind of lined up on the bar, and we would eat those. Today, you have a hard time finding very many of them. Well, the Clearwater last year caught some babies in the river, but they're not like they used to be. They're just not. They have a certain range in which they feel comfortable in the Hudson River, probably because of climate change. A very, very small change in water temperatures occurred, and it just puts them into the uncomfortable zone. So we think probably that's why they're a boreal species. They are much more comfortable up in northern New England. And the other is a rainbow smelt that used to be pretty common. My father used to go back in the 30s and 40s. He would catch them in tributaries in the springtime. Now, I don't know. I think I was talking to Clay the other day. I think I haven't seen a smelt in the river. There was some research done on the river 15 years ago. We caught some baby smelt, and that's it. I haven't seen them anymore. What happened to them? They got the message. This is becoming an uncomfortable place. The asterisk up there is interesting because I did some research on smelt, and it appears that a long time ago, before we came here, that there was a landlocked population of smelt in Lake George. Now, that Lake George is not really part of our watershed. It's like right next to our watershed, but not quite. It's really part of the St. Lawrence River watershed. So smelt came into the St. Lawrence River through Lake Champlain and down to Lake George. That's how they got there. The population in Lake George. They're now everyone's going to go ice fishing. I'll catch one. Now, I always try to, when I work with students, I always try to put things in perspective. It didn't all happen since we were here. The earliest people in the river, the earliest fishermen and the people, somewhere around 12,000 years ago. Calendar years BP, that means actual calendar years. It gives us an idea how long ago it was. And how do we know? There's a lot of archaeology. We do a lot of archaeology on the river. And some of the things we find are, like you see here, this is an assemblage of tools. There's the net. Now the net is new. But what's not new there are the scutes. Those are scales from sturgeon. The flint piece in the middle, the knife, is called a vitalis blade. There was an industry up in Ulster County, Greene County, Columbia County, where Indians would go out and catch giant sturgeon, bring them in, and hang them up by their tail. And instead of like you fillet a fish, you have to butcher a fish that weighs several hundred pounds. And they would use this special knife to butcher them. And when we do archaeology in those areas, it's not uncommon to find these along with the scutes. On the left there is a harpoon made out of a white-tailed deer bone. But those are the kinds of things that we find when we do archaeology in the Hudson River. Now, net sinkers, I brought 5 of them here today. You want to come later and look at them. Net sinkers are the indication, it's our best evidence that people were fishing in the river before any of us were here. We find along the river, it's not hard to find net sinkers, there's so many of them. If you walk along a beach that hasn't been improved by dumping things recently, it's a natural beach. You can also find rocks that look like these. Most of the time, they are pieces of sandstone that just have a little nick on each end. And native people would use natural cordage and tie these on the bottom of their nets, and they go fishing. And when they were done fishing, they cut these off. Nobody wants to carry rocks with them. So they would throw the net sinkers away, wrap up the net, carry the net with them. But these would be on the river, because this would take, on the beach, these would take any of us 2 or 3 minutes to make. Very, very easy to make one of these. So why carry it? So we do find these along the river, and I've got 6 of them up here, 5 of them up here. That's September 1609, and this is an important point to make to students. Talk about native and not native, but even more so than that, what happened in this watershed was humans went from being bystanders to being difference makers, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. Native people of the Hudson Valley found a way to blend in and get along. Once the Europeans showed up, they had a mandate to do things differently, such as fill the earth to do it, and the fish in the sea. I mean, that's quite a mandate to come into a river like the Hudson River and look at fish as something that ought to be conserved, or don't take more than you need. It wasn't kind of an ethic that they were going to follow. One of the things we did in the 19th century was connect the Great Lakes with the Hudson River for purposes of commerce. But you can imagine, once the Great Lakes were connected to the Hudson, fish started coming this way. Fish went the other way too, but most noticeably, quite a few fish that are introduced on our fish list arrived here through the Erie Canal and some of the other canals. Among them are freshwater drum. This is a fish that's in the Great Lakes. I think about in the early 80s, they began to show up in the Hudson River. Zebra mussels were here in 1991. They really started showing up. These fish eat zebra mussels. They're one of the few forms of wildlife that actually like zebra mussels. There was one caught the other day that weighed 23 pounds, just right up here by the Tappan Zee Bridge. So they made a home for themselves here. They're not native, but we don't find that they're having an issue with other fish. They're not replacing other fish. This one is. This is a channel catfish. This came here a couple different ways. It was stocked certain places. It made its way through the canals. And channel catfish, and this is something we're dealing with right now. The channel catfish is replacing the white catfish. On the bottom, you see the white catfish. White catfish is native. It's here. The problem is the channel catfish has a much broader niche in the environment that it can exploit. From its diet to where it is in the water column, and it's out-competing the white catfish. So every year we're seeing fewer and fewer white catfish. This is a good example of an introduced species having a very detrimental effect on native species. Largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, these were brought into the Hudson Valley for sport fishing purposes 100 years ago, except that, notice the abstract in 1755 largemouth bass. I was doing some programs at Fort William Henry in Lake George, and I got to read some of the old records they had, their old journals. And in 1755, the regimental surgeon at Fort William Henry, he was English, and he went fishing religiously every day, every 3 days to Lake George. And he wrote down all the fish that he caught. And in there, he wrote down about Oswego bass. And doing a little research on that, from that time and forward, Oswego bass was another common name for the largemouth bass. And we looked even further into it, and we began to find evidence that, like the smelt, there was a landlocked population of largemouth bass in Lake George. Not only the watershed, but in Lake George, that must have come down from the St. Lawrence through Lake Champlain. So kind of a little twist. It's introduced because in the general region of the watershed, it wasn't here. It was in Lake George. And it took the regimental surgeon in 1755 to point that out to us. Walleye introduced the type of perch, but it's a major game fish in the Hudson Valley. The Pirapatanga, I mentioned goldfish were probably aquarium released. We have others too. This is a type of piranha. And we've had several instances of these in the Hudson River. These are clearly fish that grew too large for their tank. You know, you buy these cute little fish, and they look wonderful, and they're colorful. Then you look one day, and they're half the size of the tank. Well, it's time to go. And so they go down the river, and they bump them, and we end up in the river. This fish, the literature tells us, cannot live in the Hudson River because of the winters. And yet we've had 2, maybe 3 occasions where we have found these fish alive and healthy in the middle of winter and not showing any adverse effect of being in cold water. Is the list complete? By the way, I have the list, and there's a whole bunch of them over there. Please help yourself to one. If you have any questions about it, I have my email address on the back of it. All 228 species. And I'm always looking for something new. I'm always looking for 229. Here's a fish that we know is in this harbor right out here right now, called a gray triggerfish. People catch them, not infrequently. The problem is, someone has to catch it, understand that it's maybe something we don't know about, take a picture, and then get a hold of somebody like myself. And that's a lot of dots that have to be connected. So each year I hope that will happen and we'll get this fish. But there are some other fish too. The snakehead, which is pretty much under control right now. This was a fish, several of these were brought up from Maryland by somebody for reasons we have no idea. Dumped them in a lake in Orange County. And left. But we know what the snakehead is, that the snakehead doesn't like the lake it's in. It'll simply get up on the land and it'll walk to another lake. And we knew they were heading towards the Hudson River, but DEC went in and apparently was able to net them all out. So we haven't heard anything from them in a couple of years now. So the northern snakehead, it's one of these fish that we say, kind of euphemistically, anything gets in its way. And it's probably true in this case. How did fish get on the list? Here's a good example of how fish get on the list. In September of 1854, a commercial fisherman was out in the river at Almanac. And we know this because Bob Schmidt has been such an ally in this search for new species. He was going through the fish collections at the New York State Museum, and lo and behold, number 1149, 2225, was a white-fin shark sucker from the Hudson River. Fully detailed. We never had any idea that it's in the Hudson. It's probably the only one that was ever caught in the Hudson River, but we had a record of it. So that became a fish on our list. We had good evidence that it was there. No photos or anything, but the New York State Museum had this great detailed account of that fish, who caught it, the length of it, and everything else. So that's how we sometimes get fish on our list. But what else is out there? And that's why I think it's important, at least for me, I really am always looking for something new, and I know there's other fish out there. When you're open to the ocean as we are, it's not difficult to understand other fish may wander in here. Some have asked me, what about this 228 number? Is that a good or bad number? Students always want to know, is that good or bad? When I tell them on the east coast of North America, at this latitude, the 228 number is okay. It's a good number. If we were to head north up into New England, their species list would probably be fewer than 228, water being colder. If we went south into Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay, the number would probably get higher because of warmer water, more fish could adapt to that. So where we are right here in North America, this latitude, 228 is a good number. 229 would be a better number, by the way. So if you think you've come across a fish that you don't know about, and you can send me a body, I get fish in the mail frequently. Usually common fish, white first, they ever saw it before, they'll mail it to me. And strictly against postal regulations. But that thing they ask you about any perfume or batteries, they never say fish though, I have to say. They never say lithium batteries, they never say is there a white person in that. But a body, an email with a really good image, that's what I get a lot of. So that kind of gives you an idea of fish. I didn't cover them all. But everyone has a story to tell. Every fish on there has a wonderful story to tell, how it relates to us, how it relates to the Hudson River. And collectively, it is just an absolutely fascinating collection of fish and wildlife that lives in the Hudson River. Thank you. Okay, we got time for questions and questions. Yeah. And remember, the checklists are out there. And by the way, that checklist is it's like a bird checklist. I use it when I go to the beach with my students. At the end of the day, we make checks as to what fish we caught. And it's in taxonomic order, the most primitive fish to the most advanced fish. So it gives them an idea of where these fish fit into the mosaic of the Hudson River. But if you want a document, 9-page document that includes all the taxonomy, species, genus, who describes them, if you email me, I'll send that to you. As you know. Okay, question?
I used to fish with Everett Knack up in
Yep.
Almanac, and my question was, we had 90-degree water temperature in Ames Seminar. Does that affect your studies much in any way?
That's a good point. And this past year, and I think the year before, we've had some, maybe 3 years now, we've had some summertime water temperatures in the Hudson that are off the scale, 90-some degrees, which we never saw before. I'm hesitating to say this is something to do with climate change, but we certainly are seeing it. It affects, for one thing, if the water temperature gets that warm, it's probably very low in dissolved oxygen. And fish are all about dissolved oxygen. They really need enough of it. And so they're going to leave an inshore area where it's in the 90s, and they're going to go out in deeper water or find a place where they get more dissolved oxygen. So the answer is yes. And we'll see what happens this year. But we've had several years in a row when the water temperatures were just incredibly high. But you know, that's a snapshot of weather. What we need is a long-term look at climate to see if this is something that keeps happening over and over again. But we're looking at that.
Thank you.
Everett Knack, the cloud burst, yeah. Questions? Yes.
Could you say something about man-induced pollution, fish in the river?
Yeah, I will. And you know, I got a question about this the other day, that whenever, like these harbor porpoises that show up in the river, immediately I had people sending me texts saying how wonderful it was. We must be cleaning up the Hudson River. From my perspective of wildlife in the river, we saw more shad and more striped bass and more sturgeon during the dark days of the 1950s when ungodly things were going in the river. A lot of what we see with fish in the river and pollution has an impact on how we can interact with the fish, whether we can eat them or not. The fish don't always see it that way. Dissolved oxygen is very important, but we've had tremendous numbers of fish in the river when the river we thought couldn't handle with all the pollution that was in there. So there's not always a correlation between pollution in the river and what the fish look like. For the most part, there's some exceptions. But most of the time, the fish are doing okay. It's whether we can eat them or not. Right now, we can't have stray bass, can't have sturgeon, can't have shad. All these fish are there, not because of pollution, but because their populations have sunk so low from us not knowing when to say when, that we're not able to harvest them. But I don't see a direct correlation. There's some, but not overwhelming. It's like when it was all once through cooling in the river, and when you flush your toilet, everything went into the river, and there were no fish here. I just don't see that. I'm not so sure that equates. So by cleaning up the river, it allows us to use the river in ways that we can't otherwise, swimming and eating the fish. So that's really where the impact is.
Senator, that
This is a question from John Waldman.
Oh.
Great talk, Tom. How soon will you be adding the round gobies?
Yeah, this is John makes a good point. The round goby is one of these blessings from the Great Lakes. It and others are on its way. And you know, as someone who deals with fish and scientists who are even more involved than I am, we worry about these because it's difficult to predict when the round goby shows up, what it's going to displace, what native fish, what part of the ecosystem is going to get turned on its head. I think of the channel catfish and the white catfish and how those two have interacted. What you need is an invasive species with a much more flexible lifestyle and life history to be able to replace. The white catfish was having it all to himself here for probably millions of years, and now thousands of years anyway. And along comes the channel catfish. Now the round goby, we'll only catch one. I don't think we've had them yet. We're not in the Mohawk as far as I know, although I'm not so sure that's the case. They may be, if they're not there, they'll be there probably soon. These are fish that were introduced by mistake over the Great Lakes. You know, we used to do a lot of that. Zebra mussel is a good example. The promise of financial greatness overwhelmed our ability to say, let's check and see what we're putting in the Great Lakes. Yes.
This is great. Do you have materials, or do you ever put outreach materials in Spanish? Because I noticed I managed a striped bass program, and a lot of Spanish people write to me. They caught the striped bass, or walk along the pier. There's a lot of Spanish-speaking people, fishing.
Yeah, I don't have it myself. It'd be an interesting thing to ask the state, see if they can come up with something like that. I'm not, and I know the situation because for a couple of years, I worked, part of what I was doing was with the New York State Health Department. My job was to go along the river and talk to people and ask them about what they're catching and do they know what they should eat, what they should not eat. And a lot of them were Latino, and I know a little Spanish, so it's okay, but as far as giving them material, they couldn't read it. So what you're saying is important. And it's not just Spanish. When we see up where I am in the river, up in Dutchess County, there are a lot of Eastern Europeans who speak Russian. I was with, the last few days, I was with several of them on the Hudson River on their carp fishing, and I had to use sign language. We talked, we communicated, but they knew Russian and I knew English, and we were not going to communicate that way. So it's not just Spanish, it's others as well. But it's good, that's a good point. Oh, here, yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to the biodiversity. Do you think we're, kind of breaking even, or the new species?
Well, the thing about the Hudson River is that I keep going back to this. It is an estuary, and it's very dynamic. And so the biodiversity you see today may not be the biodiversity you see tomorrow. The seasons come and seasons go. There are times of the year when we've got an influx of fish, for example, or birds during the migration season. So the biodiversity is also impinged a lot by invasive species in the uplands, trees, flowers, and in the Hudson River. So this idea of biodiversity, if you have a closed system, you can kind of measure that. You did the animals, right? You didn't mean people, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm getting to okay, wait a minute. Maybe we're talking about Spanish and Russian. Yeah, so it's a difficult thing. You almost have to pick a point in time to say, on this day in the river, we had this nice balance between whatever two parallel systems you're talking about. So with the Hudson River, it's always good to remember it's a very dynamic system. We have this saying, and it's not my saying, people have said it for years, is that no one moment on this river will ever be repeated again. The combination of air temperature, water temperature, barometric pressure, current, tide, runoff from upriver, all these, there's a dozen of these factors that come together to make a moment unique. And that moment might never happen again. So to be able to put a stake in the ground and say the biodiversity is this, it's kind of difficult because of the dynamic nature. Now, if you take a farm pond, you can do that. It's a really nice idea, and I don't, to really get your answer here a little bit more, I don't see an imbalance, except when the invasive species, like when this brown goby shows up, we may have an issue. When zebra mussels came here in 1991, we had a terrific imbalance because they were eating a lot of the plankton in the river, particularly zooplankton, or phytoplankton, and some zooplankton. And so it began impacting fish like sturgeon and reproducing, and where's the food for the babies and all those kinds of things. Until the zebra mussels began siphoning their own young out of the water. That's when we hit stasis again. Yeah, zebra mussels start siphoning their own young out of the water. Fuck them away. Yeah. So the idea, again, that was a moment in time when you would have looked at it and said the biodiversity is being tilted now because of this problem. So it's not an easy thing to handle. Yes.
I have a related question, which is, do you have any insights about how we figure out how abundant fish were in the pre-European?
Oh, well, if it's anecdotal accounts, we've all heard the anecdotal accounts that, and colonial people were here, they could walk barefoot across streams on their backs and things like that. People exaggerate, anglers particularly tell these stories, and you can't believe them. I think the river is richer now in good organic material than probably was in colonial times. The other issue with the Hudson River that has added to this idea of organic material is that when native people were here, I mentioned they kind of lived in harmony, here I use that word, they lived in harmony with wildlife. They weren't finding new ways every day to funnel water into the Hudson. There were no parking lots and combined sewers and cutting down forests and all this stuff. And so when we began to do that, when Europeans came here and began to cut down forests, water began to push into the Hudson River, bring sediments with it. Salinity became very, very dynamic. Back before Europeans came here, the salinity in the river, the regime was probably quite stable. It moved up and down the river depending on the season, but it probably was not unexpected. There were no really big spikes and big drops. But now we've got this other, which we've kind of taken care of that now. We're sort of looking at the watershed right now, looking at drainage patterns. we're aware of the bad things that can happen when we do unwise things in the watershed. But as far as numbers of fish, the anecdotal accounts, unfortunately, is kind of all we have to go on. But the species were here, and because there are so many natural cycles going on, if I had any inclination in 1850 what the herring one was like, I could attribute that to something we were doing on the river, good or bad, or it might just be a natural cycle. Such as the Lafayette. Why did they come in 1824 in huge numbers? It was probably nothing we did. The coastal population had a big year, fewer bluefish around maybe, and they had an overflow into the Hudson River. So, see, the river, Hudson River being an estuary, a very dynamic system, it's difficult to be able to make predictions on a lot of this stuff. Todd?
So, given your archaeological experiences up and down the river, I was wondering if you've ever had the chance to go through an oyster midden site, and if so, whether anything interesting.
Yeah, oyster middens, back before Europeans showed up, oysters were, it's interesting, they were a very poor food source. But for some reason, the Indians liked them. And what they would do is, in various places along the river, they would go out and harvest oysters, so they'd take out the meat, and they would take the shells and they would make a collection. Kitchen midden, they would call it. So we have places along the river where oyster shells from anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 years ago are measured how many feet thick they are. And when we've gone through them, we go through those. We mostly find throwaway things, broken tools, throw them in with the oyster shells. That's really what we find. We occasionally find, even if they're broken, sometimes you can pick up a broken tool that had no further use to this native person, but you can look at it and you can ascertain what it was used for. So it gives you an insight into what they were doing, the types of tools they were using at that time. I love archaeology because it connects the river of then to the river of now. And I've always been a big proponent that everything we see today is as a result of what happened in the past. We're a cumulative effect, everything's happened in the past. So by doing archaeology, I've been able to study who was here, what they were up to. We knew what kind of fish they liked. We knew they liked white-tailed deer more than anything there ever was. They ate so many white-tailed deer, very sick of it. But they liked certain kinds of fish. They had smoking stations. They didn't have ways to preserve their fish. So down here, you probably use some salt. But upriver a ways, they had very few choices. They would usually smoke their fish, put it in a pit in the ground where it was fairly cool, and they could stretch that fish. The springtime, a lot of fish, they could stretch that well into summer to the fall. Pull it out, and they could eat it. They may have mold all over it, but in those days, what was considered food is different than what we have a loaf of bread that goes moldy, it goes out. The native person would just scrape the mold up and eat it, which is fine. It's okay. But archaeology does make this connection. And going through things like middens is a real window into what they were doing. Mostly because a lot of the sites I've done on the Hudson River, there's not a whole lot of material, and a lot of times it's scattered. With a midden, you get a very condensed area that sort of reflects over the period of maybe decades of what these people were up to.
Yeah. What do you think happens to a lot of these tropical fish? If they make it back, or is it?
Some of them, no. Well, we don't guess on this. So what we know is, here's the spot-fin butterfly fish. Here's what the literature says it needs to survive. And we know that when fall time comes, it's going to either die or it somehow is going to find a way to adapt. The piranhas did, but a lot of these tropical fishes probably don't. It isn't like they can say, like birds, fall's coming, I'm going to take off. And a lot of them find temporary refuge.
More like even the saltwater fish. Say the ladyfish.
They do.
They can head back.
If they're so inclined. I mean, they don't even know where they are when they're here. And they don't even know where going back is, because they probably arrived here as larvae. But we do have fish, like bluefish, for example. Bluefish are all over the place from now right through October, November. And then they'll head south, and the bluefish will end up off the Carolinas. And then this time of year, they come back. Because they've done that. That's part of their institutional knowledge, so to speak. But a lot of these tropical fish, yeah, they're here, they don't know where here is. And they don't know where they came from. So a lot of them probably won't make it. What we do have are places, refuges in East River and other places, where there are warm water outflows for various purposes. And a lot of times these fish will find ways to find refuge in there. And they can survive, maybe survive the winter. John Wallman's got some stories of that, where fish have been able to survive very, very difficult winter water temperatures by finding a comfort zone somewhere. Yeah.
Didn't some of these fish, like tropical fish, depend on how many hours of daylight you had?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure how that would relate to this, but,
It may have some effect on it.
oh. Yeah, no, I don't really know. You know, when we find a couple of baby barracudas here, it's hard to make any assessment of things like that. You know, they arrived up here as larval, they turned into juveniles, they swam up the river, they have no idea where they are. They probably don't, because they are from a tropical area, when it gets cold, they can't even interpret what that means. They feel uncomfortable, they don't know what to do about it. You know? And less than a day, like, that's more of a bird thing, but I can see where you might think about that.
Sarah, do we have more? Why don't we wrap up with these?
Okay.
And then give you a break, Tom.
The first one, I think you almost answered, just more into.
Yeah, that's the entire winter of the harbor. And yeah, what is the likeliness or percent chance that young tropical strays coming up at the end of summer will be able to survive the entire winter in the harbor or the Hudson? Without knowing any more specifics about what species, it's likely that most of them probably won't unless they find a refuge, as I mentioned. And some do, but a lot of them probably just don't. They really can't cope with it. And it's mostly because if you get a fish that the center of abundance is off Miami, Florida, it doesn't understand when it gets cold. They never get anything like that. So I think a lot of them don't. There are instances where tropical-like fish survive the winter because they're able to find a warm water outflow or something like that there. The other question is, how should I respond to learning about fish diversity? Do they still want to eat them? Yeah, what I tried to found the second one, ear stones, the otoliths, or an ear bone that fish have. And we actually grind those down to see how old the fish is. They have growth rings on their ear bones. I'm trying to think, that's a good question. We ever found in our archaeological sites? Yes, we have. We have found drumfish have these really, really big otoliths or ear bones. We have found some of those in archaeological sites, and we're able to figure out how old this fish was. As far as children are concerned, when I have students on the river, you know, it's up to me to be able to convince them, to talk to them, to understand, to help them understand that these fish are wonderful, wonderful creatures. And we get into this story of eating them, and within the parameters of what the health department allows, you know, I get into a lot of, if you have to eat a fish out of the river, you're not going to die. But I suggest to them that you fillet the fish and skin the fillet, and what you're left with is a nice white fillet, throw the rest of it away, because if there is anything in that fish you should not be eating, it's probably not in the fillet itself, it's in the head, the stomach, the tail, places like that. So if you get rid of all of that, what you're left with is probably not going to hurt you. In fact, I'll say it's not going to hurt you. And the other part of that answer is that you're not going to eat it every day for 5 years. You know, if you eat fish once every month like that, it's not going to be an issue. So children respond to this, and I have to be careful not to think I'm brainwashing them, because I'm always saying to myself, no, what I'm telling them is only for their own good. Students through fish learn to respect nature and learn to respect the river and all the parts of it. And so that's one of the main avenues of introduction to students, is to get them to feel comfortable about getting in the river. Shark's not going to eat you. You know, helping with the net, catching fish. They get a sense of accomplishment when they pull the net and it comes. One time last fall, we were pulling the net up at Calwisi in the winter, and we pulled in 1,000 fish in one hole. We couldn't even get it out of the river. And the students just stood there, they were Girl Scouts. They stood there with their mouth open like, unbelievable, I couldn't believe this. And then we looked out in the water, and there were these dark shadows out of the water. Each one had 1,000 fish in it. And the whole thing came to life for them. Everything I had said was now right before them. They really got it. And that's a nice thing that happens. Any more there?
That's it. We're gonna give you a breather, Tom.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. If you have a checklist out on the table, my email address on the back. If you want the other report, which gives all the taxonomy and who describes them and all that stuff, email me and I'll send it to you. And if you're interested in getting the Hudson River Almanac, you can sign here. Your email address and your name will do that. You'll get the one going out Friday. If you're interested.
Yeah, we have Tom's list out here on the table, so if you'd like to take one separate.
The checklist, yeah.
Yeah, there are two lists on there.
Next month, May 14th, we're gonna switch over to, we're not doing fish next month.
Okay.
We're gonna do how the water flows in Newark Bay. Bryce Clovet from Newark Bay. So,
If you want to see that, if you want to see the nets, these are from sites I've worked on the river. These are direct evidence that people were using nets on the river. They're all between, when I radiocarbonated the context of these, they're all between 3,000 and 4,000 years old. It's kind of